Sitting across a turkey dinner while your brother humiliates you and your parents happily pour him more wine is a bizarre feeling. I always thought silence was the best shield. But when he turned my quiet life into a punchline for his victory speech, he forgot one crucial detail about my boring remote job. I hunt down the dirty digital secrets arrogant men try to bury, and I held his entire criminal record right in my hands. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The drive to my parents' house in suburban Chicago was always a journey fraught with a very specific kind of anxiety. The winter sky was a bruised purple, and snow was falling heavily as my husband Liam navigated our sensible, 7-year-old sedan into the expansive driveway of Arthur and Diane Powell. In the back seat, our 10-year-old twins were vibrating with the pure, unadulterated excitement that only Christmas Eve can bring. I looked at their glowing faces through the rearview mirror and took a deep, steadying breath. I harbored a fragile, foolish hope that tonight would be different. I wanted just one peaceful holiday dinner, free from the thinly veiled criticisms and the constant, exhausting comparisons that had defined my entire upbringing. We stepped out of the car, the biting wind whipping around us, and made our way to the front door. The house was decorated to absolute perfection, a picture-perfect display of suburban success with miles of twinkling lights. But to me, it always felt a little too cold. My life was quiet, and I deeply preferred it that way. I worked from home as a remote cybersecurity auditor for a highly respected firm called Aegis Cyber Solutions. To my family, however, I was essentially a recluse who spent all day staring at a computer screen in comfortable clothing. They simply did not understand the intricate layers of digital security I navigated daily. My job was not about fixing routers or telling people to turn their machines off and on again. I hunted anomalies in massive corporate networks, tracing data leaks and fortifying digital vaults against sophisticated attacks. It was meticulous, invisible work that required absolute focus and a sharp analytical mind. I took immense pride in being the unseen shield for thousands of people. It was a humble reality, devoid of public accolades, magazine covers, or flashy corner offices, but it was honest, and it paid for our mortgage and the children's education without requiring me to compromise my integrity. We had been inside for about 45 minutes, making polite conversation with my parents in the formal living room, when the unmistakable roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet of the snow-covered neighborhood. My brother Carter had finally arrived. He was fashionably late, as was his unwavering custom, ensuring that his entrance would command the absolute attention of everyone in the house. A sleek, midnight black sports car idled loudly in the driveway for a full minute before he finally killed the engine. He stepped out of the vehicle like a monarch descending from a carriage. He was draped in an impeccably tailored designer overcoat, wearing Italian leather shoes that likely cost more than the current value of my entire car. The air of supreme arrogance practically radiated off him, filling the room before he even crossed the threshold. My parents immediately sprang to their feet, their faces lighting up with a radiant, adoring joy that I had rarely, if ever, been on the receiving end of. "Merry Christmas to the finest family in Illinois," Carter bellowed as he swept into the grand foyer, bringing a gust of freezing air with him. He handed his heavy coat to my father, who took it with the eagerness of a hired butler. Carter turned his gaze toward the living room, his sharp eyes sweeping over Liam, the kids, and finally landing squarely on me. A familiar, condescending smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Stella, I see you brought out the formal fleece for the occasion," he chuckled, gesturing lazily toward my simple, albeit neat, navy wool sweater. "I was actually worried you might show up in your pajamas. You know, since your job is basically sitting on the couch playing glorified tech support all day. Tell me, sis, how many grandmas did you help reset their email passwords this week?" His voice was intentionally loud, echoing off the high ceilings, designed to make sure his belittling words reached every corner of the room. My stomach tightened, the familiar knot of humiliation forming instantly in my gut. I looked toward my parents, hoping against hope that for once they might intervene or offer a single word of defense. Instead, my mother, Diane, let out a light, airy laugh. "Oh, Carter, stop teasing your sister," she said. Though her tone held absolutely zero reprimand, my father, Arthur, chuckled right along with her, patting Carter firmly on the shoulder in a gesture of proud solidarity. They viewed his blatant disrespect as nothing more than the charming wit of their dynamic. Highly successful golden boy, in their eyes, Carter could do absolutely no wrong. His immense wealth and towering social status excused every fundamental flaw in his character. I felt my face flush with a toxic mixture of anger and deep shame. Just as I opened my mouth to defend the complexity of my work at Aegis, I felt a warm, incredibly strong hand envelop mine under the heavy oak dining table. Liam gave my fingers a firm, steadying squeeze. He did not say a single word, but his thumb brushed gently against my knuckles, a silent, grounding plea. I glanced over at the twins, who were happily playing with their new wooden puzzle on the rug, completely oblivious to the toxic undercurrent swirling violently above their heads, for their sake, and only for their sake. I swallowed my burning pride, clamped my mouth shut, and forced a stiff, unnatural smile onto my face, bracing myself for the long night ahead. The formal dining room was stiflingly warm, the heavy mahogany table groaning under the weight of my mother's extravagant holiday spread. The scent of roasted rosemary and rich gravy hung thick in the air, but my appetite had completely vanished the moment we took our seats. As soon as the crystal wine glasses were filled, Carter seamlessly hijacked the entire auditory space, turning a family meal into his personal press conference. He spoke at length about a recent weekend getaway to an exclusive resort in Aspen, dropping names of tech billionaires and local politicians with a practiced, nauseating ease. He spent a solid 10 minutes describing a private charity gala he had attended, making sure to highlight that a single ticket cost more than what most people earned in 6 months. Every sentence was meticulously crafted to establish his supreme dominance, transforming the dining room into a shrine dedicated entirely to his financial triumphs. Once he had thoroughly exhausted his own accomplishments, his predatory gaze shifted across the table to my husband. Liam was quietly cutting a piece of meat for our daughter, completely unbothered by the overwhelming display of ego. Carter leaned back in his ornate chair, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass with a mocking grin. "So, Liam," Carter began, his voice dripping with artificial curiosity, "still rubbing liniment on arthritic knees down at the clinic? I suppose it is noble work, helping the elderly stretch their calves. But man, I just cannot fathom doing something with zero upward mobility. There is absolutely no scaling in physical therapy. You are trading hours for pennies. Have you ever considered getting a real business degree? Or are you content massaging sore backs for the next 30 years? You are dealing with the physical complaints of people who have already lived their lives. Where is the innovation? Where is the disruption? You need a massive mindset shift, Liam. Otherwise, you will be stuck in that sterile clinic wearing scrubs until you are the one needing a walker." The sheer disrespect was a physical blow. Liam was a highly specialized physical therapist who helped stroke victims regain their independence, a career built on immense compassion and skill. Yet, Liam merely offered a polite, strained nod, refusing to take the bait. But Carter was just getting warmed up. The lack of a defensive reaction from Liam seemed to embolden him further. He suddenly leaned forward, resting his elbows on the crisp white linen tablecloth, and locked eyes with my 10-year-old twins. They were happily eating their mashed potatoes, oblivious to the venom lacing their uncle's words. "Listen to me, kids," Carter said, his tone shifting to one of a mock-wise mentor imparting golden advice. "The world is a fiercely competitive place. If you want to actually mean something, if you want to drive the best cars and live in houses like this one, you need to study how Uncle Carter operates. You have to aim high. Do not settle for a small, boring, financially strapped life like your parents have chosen. It is a dead end. You do not want to end up counting coupons or worrying about the price of gas, do you? My heart hammered violently against my ribs. Attacking Liam and me was one thing, but dragging my children into his twisted narrative of wealth equaling worth was crossing an unforgivable line. He was actively trying to rewrite their perception of us, attempting to plant seeds of discontent and greed in their innocent minds. The sheer audacity of him sitting at a holiday table, eating food my mother spent 2 days preparing, and using that platform to systematically dismantle his own sister's family was breathtaking in its cruelty. Desperate to de-escalate the situation and shield my children from further poison, I forced a high, completely unnatural pitch into my voice. The turkey is exceptionally moist this year. Mom, I said, projecting my voice louder than necessary. Did you use a different brine? And wow, look at that snow outside. The news said we might get over 12 inches by tomorrow morning. We should probably hit the road before the snowplows stop running. It was a clumsy, frantic pivot, a blatant attempt to throw a thick blanket over a raging grease fire. Carter slammed his hand flat against the table, rattling the expensive silverware and silencing the room instantly. "Oh, please, Stella," he scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Stop with the pathetic weather deflections. Why do you always do this? Whenever someone tries to inject a dose of ambition or harsh truth into your life, you instantly hide behind mundane small talk. It is honestly embarrassing. You are terrified of facing reality because you know you have completely failed to reach your potential. You chose a mediocre path, and now you are projecting your massive insecurities by trying to shut down anyone who has actually achieved greatness." The cruelty in his voice was raw and unfiltered, stripping away any pretense of brotherly teasing. I looked desperately to the head of the table, silently pleading for my parents to finally step in and establish a boundary. Instead, the sight that met my eyes made my stomach churn with a sickening sense of betrayal. My father was nodding solemnly, his eyes fixed on Carter with absolute reverence, as if my brother had just delivered a profound philosophical truth. My mother sighed softly, looking at me with an expression of profound pity mixed with mild disappointment. "Carter has a valid point, darling," she murmured softly, slicing into her meal. "He just wants what is best for you and the kids. He understands how the real world works now." They were utterly blinded by his designer suits and bank accounts, willingly sacrificing their daughter's dignity to bask in the blinding, toxic glow of their golden sun. The heat in my chest crystallized into pure, freezing ice. There was no love in this room for me, only a transactional hierarchy where human value was measured strictly by profit margins, and I was officially at the very bottom. The clinking sound of a heavy silver spoon striking crystal cut sharply through the warm atmosphere of the dining room. Carter stood up, smoothing the front of his tailored shirt, his face flushed with the kind of triumphant glow reserved for conquerors. He raised his glass of expensive red wine high into the air, demanding absolute silence. "If I could have everyone's undivided attention for just a moment," he began, his voice dropping into a theatrical, commanding register. "I have a rather monumental announcement to make, something that officially cements my legacy. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, my financial technology firm, VaultCore, is being formally acquired by Meridian Bank. The final purchase price is $80 million. The reaction was instantaneous and deafening. My mother gasped so sharply she nearly dropped her linen napkin, her hands flying to her cheeks in pure, unadulterated ecstasy. My father vaulted out of his chair with an agility I had not seen from him in decades. He rushed around the table, grabbing Carter by the shoulders and pulling him into a fierce, tearful embrace. $80 million! My father practically shouted, his voice trembling with overwhelming pride. "I always knew it, son. I always knew your brilliant mind would change the world. You are a visionary. Carter, an absolute genius." My mother was weeping openly now, raising her glass with a trembling hand to toast the supreme intellect of her golden child. The room erupted into a chaotic symphony of congratulations, a sickening worship of wealth that echoed off the formal wallpaper. But I did not hear the cheering. I did not see the tears of joy. The ambient noise of the room faded into a dull, distant ringing in my ears. The blood drained completely from my face, pooling like heavy lead in my stomach. My entire body turned to solid ice, paralyzed by a shock so profound it stole the breath directly from my lungs. Vaultcore, Meridian Bank. The two names slammed together in my mind, triggering a violent cascade of classified files and encrypted server logs I had spent the last 14 days tearing apart line by line. My specific division at Aegis Cyber Solutions was the elite unit contracted by Meridian Bank to conduct the final, non-negotiable security audit of Vaultcore's entire infrastructure prior to the acquisition. It was supposed to be a routine check, a standard procedure before moving $80 million across corporate accounts. But it was not routine. The architecture was a complete disaster. I had spent 96 hours straight tracking the hidden subroutines. I stared blankly at the perfectly roasted turkey, my mind racing through the horrific digital landscape I had just mapped out. I knew the absolute, undeniable truth. I knew exactly what lay beneath the glossy, user-friendly interface of Carter's supposedly revolutionary financial platform. Less than 3 months ago, Vaultcore had suffered a catastrophic, cascading data breach. Hackers had bypassed their embarrassingly outdated firewall and siphoned massive amounts of capital directly from the accounts of thousands of everyday users, working-class people, small business owners, families saving for college. They had all been quietly robbed. Instead of reporting the breach to the federal oversight committees, instead of freezing the platform and compensating the victims, my brilliant, visionary brother had chosen a different path. He had ordered his lead developers to patch the gaping hole silently, and then he personally forged heavily encrypted security compliance documents to present to the Meridian Bank Acquisition Board. He buried the stolen funds under layers of phantom transactions, essentially building a digital house of cards on the ruined finances of innocent people, all to ensure his massive payout went through before the entire system collapsed. The audacity of his crime was staggering. He was selling a hollow shell, an active crime scene, to a major financial institution. Through the roaring static in my head, Carter's booming voice pulled me back to the agonizing reality of the dining room. He had broken away from my father's embrace and was now leaning heavily across the table, his eyes locked onto mine with a predatory, manic gleam. He extended his index finger, pointing it aggressively inches from my face. "So, Stella," he sneered, the sheer volume of his voice cutting through my parents' joyful weeping. "Let us do some basic math. Since you are so good at staring at computer screens, if you save every single penny from your little work-from-home gig, how many lifetimes do you think it will take for you to earn even the loose change falling out of my $80 million contract? 5 lifetimes? 10? Maybe if you work overtime answering those help desk tickets, you can afford to buy a car that was actually manufactured in this decade." He threw his head back and laughed, a cruel, echoing sound that filled the room. My parents chuckled along with him, wiping tears of joy from their eyes, completely blind to the monster standing in their dining room. I sat perfectly still, my eyes traveling from his accusing finger to his arrogant, flushed face. For 35 years, I had swallowed my pride, I had bitten my tongue, endured the mockery, and accepted the role of the lesser sibling simply to maintain the fragile illusion of family peace. I had convinced myself that tolerating his gigantic ego was the mature thing to do. But in that exact crystal-clear second, looking at the man who was actively laughing while destroying the financial futures of thousands of innocent people just to inflate his own bank account, a massive psychological shift occurred within me. My silence was not peace. My silence was complicity. I was no longer dealing with an arrogant older brother who liked to brag. I was sitting across from a ruthless, immoral fraudster who believed he was utterly untouchable. He thought he had successfully buried his digital skeletons so deep that no one would ever find them. He had no idea that the very person he was publicly humiliating was the exact architect of his impending destruction. The fear and humiliation that had choked me all evening completely evaporated, replaced by an icy, absolute resolve. The era of my endurance was officially over. Carter wiped a tear of mirth from his eye. Leaning back so far his chair tilted precariously on its two hind legs, he took another large gulp of his wine, sloshing the crimson liquid against the sides of the glass, before setting it down with a heavy thud. He looked past me, his gaze settling on my twins who were quietly coloring at the far end of the room. "Tell you what, Liam," Carter offered, his voice laced with a sickening, faux benevolence. "Because I am feeling incredibly generous today, and because it is the season of giving, I am going to make a pledge right here, right now. When the ink dries on that $80 million contract tomorrow, I am going to establish a private charity fund. I will set up a trust specifically designed to bail your kids out of the crushing student loan debt they are inevitably going to inherit from you two. Consider it a rescue package so they do not end up living in a cramped apartment, eating instant noodles, and working dead-end jobs while wishing they had an uncle like me to save them." The air in the room suddenly grew thick, heavy, and violently suffocating. My mother clasped her hands together in front of her chest, her eyes wide with manufactured awe. "Oh, Carter, that is so incredibly generous of you. You have such a massive heart. Do you hear that? Stella, your brother is securing your children's future." I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Liam, whose jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. My hands, which had been trembling with suppressed rage just moments before, were now entirely still. A profound, terrifying calm washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins and sharpening my senses to a razor edge. I slowly unclasped my hands from my lap. With deliberate, agonizingly precise movements, I picked up my silver knife and fork. I aligned them perfectly parallel to each other, resting them gently on the edge of my fine porcelain dinner plate. The faint clink of the metal against the china was the only sound I made, yet it felt as loud as a gunshot in the stuffy dining room. I lifted my chin and locked my eyes directly onto Carter's flushed, arrogant face. I did not blink. I stripped every ounce of emotion, every trace of the subservient younger sister, completely out of my expression. "Carter," I said. My voice was no longer high or frantic. It was a low, perfectly modulated hum, cold enough to shatter glass. "Since we are discussing the brilliant architecture of your platform, I have a very simple, professional question for you. Could you please explain to the table the specific core data encryption standard your developers implemented to secure the primary user financial ledgers over the past 90 days? Are you utilizing a standard advanced encryption standard with a 256-bit key? Or did your team attempt to integrate a custom algorithmic hash that bypasses standard federal compliance protocols?" Carter stopped swaying in his chair. The mocking smile remained plastered on his lips, but his eyes narrowed a fraction of an inch. He let out a loud, condescending snort and waved his hand through the air as if swatting away a mildly annoying insect. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Stella, please do not try to use big tech words you memorized from a random internet article just to sound intelligent at the dinner table. It is genuinely pathetic. You push digital paper for a living. You handle petty compliance checklists and reset server passwords. You do not possess the foundational cognitive capacity, let alone the necessary security clearance, to even begin to comprehend the high-level, proprietary cryptographic architecture my engineers have built. Just stick to your little help desk tickets and let the adults handle the multi-million-dollar infrastructure." He reached for his wine glass again, utterly dismissive, convinced he had swatted me back down into my designated inferior place. I did not say another word to him. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my wool cardigan and retrieved my sleek, company-issued smartphone. I placed it flat on the mahogany table, directly next to my perfectly aligned silverware. I tapped the screen, unlocking it, and navigated straight to my encrypted corporate contacts list. My parents watched me with a mixture of confusion and mounting irritation. Completely failing to grasp the tectonic shift occurring right in front of them, I pressed the call button for the direct, private emergency line of Marcus Vance, the executive director of the Mergers and Acquisitions Division at Meridian Bank. The phone dialed out. I did not put it on speaker, but the room was so dead silent that the sharp, digital ringing echoed clearly. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Marcus," I stated, my voice slicing through the heavy air with absolute, chilling authority. I was no longer Stella the Disappointment. I was Stella Powell, Lead Systems Auditor at Aegis Cyber Solutions. This is a code-red priority communication. I need you to initiate an immediate, total freeze on the Vault Core acquisition process. Do not authorize the transfer of the $80 million tomorrow morning. I am officially flagging a Level 1 critical security vulnerability within their core financial database. Furthermore, I have documented irrefutable evidence of active malicious concealment regarding a massive unpatched data breach affecting thousands of client accounts. The compliance certificates they provided to your board are fraudulent. The platform is actively compromised. Halt the deal. Understood. Stella, freezing all assets and halting the acquisition pipeline right now. Send the encrypted logs to my secure server immediately, Marcus replied, his professional, urgent tone clearly audible in the quiet room. Sending the decryption keys and the full audit trail in exactly 2 minutes, I confirmed, my eyes never once leaving Carter's face. Thank you. Marcus, I ended the call and placed the phone back down on the table, the screen fading to black. The silence that violently crashed down upon the dining room was absolute, deafening, and completely dead. It was a suffocating vacuum that sucked the oxygen straight out of the room. For a span of 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then, the delusion shattered. My mother slammed her hands flat against the table, her face contorting into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Are you insane? How dare you sit at my table and put on this pathetic, jealous little theatrical act? Calling some random person to pretend you have power over your brother's company? You are intentionally trying to ruin his celebration because you are so bitter about your own miserable life. You are a spiteful, hateful girl." My father was on his feet again, his face a terrifying shade of purple, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Apologize to him right now," he roared, completely ignoring the reality of what had just transpired. "You apologize to Carter this instant for this ridiculous stunt." I ignored them completely. My attention was singularly focused on the man sitting across from me, watching as the arrogant, $80 million smile slowly, agonizingly peeled itself off his face. My mother's hysterical shrieks and my father's deafening demands for a formal apology hung violently in the air, creating a chaotic symphony of denial. I did not break my gaze away from Carter. He sat perfectly rigid, forcing a strained, dismissive laugh from his chest, desperately attempting to project the image of an unbothered titan of industry. He reached for his wine, muttering something under his breath about my pathetic need for attention and my flair for cheap theatrics. But underneath his carefully constructed bravado, the facade was cracking. A tiny, frantic pulse beat visibly at the base of his neck, and a thin sheen of nervous sweat began to form on his forehead. Exactly 60 seconds passed. The deafening shouting from my parents eventually faded into a tense, expectant silence, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, a sharp, aggressive corporate ringtone sliced through the stifling atmosphere. It was coming directly from the inside pocket of Carter's custom-tailored jacket. He set his crystal wine glass down, a wave of profound relief washing over his face as a smug, victorious grin returned to his lips. He pulled out the device and purposefully turned the glowing screen toward my parents, making sure they could clearly read the caller identification. "See?" he gloated, his voice dripping with renewed arrogance and vindication. "It is the Meridian Bank Executive Board, They are undoubtedly calling to finalize the phrasing for tomorrow morning's press release. Watch and learn. Stella. Watch how actual business is conducted. He confidently tapped the green accept button and brought the phone to his ear. Carter here. Merry Christmas. Gentlemen, I trust we are all set for the big day. His tone was booming, dripping with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the world. But that triumphant swagger lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Whatever was being spoken on the other end of the line acted like a lethal injection directly into his ego. I sat in my chair, filled with an intense, quiet, and profoundly icy satisfaction, watching as the arrogant flush completely evaporated from his cheeks. His skin turned the horrifying, translucent color of old parchment. The hand holding the smartphone to his ear began to tremble. It started as a subtle vibration, barely noticeable, but within seconds it escalated into a full-blown, uncontrollable physical shake. His jaw dropped, hanging completely slack as his eyes darted wildly around the room. Seeing nothing. What? Carter croaked. His previously commanding baritone was instantly reduced to a pathetic, reedy squeak. No, wait, listen to me. Gentlemen, there is a massive misunderstanding here. Freeze the assets? You absolutely cannot do that. The acquisition timeline is locked. He vaulted out of his chair frantically, the sudden movement knocking the heavy mahogany furniture backward until it crashed onto the hardwood floor. He began to pace wildly around the edge of the dining table, looking exactly like a trapped, panicked animal. Who fed you this garbage? A Level 1 critical vulnerability? A systemic data breach? That is a completely fabricated lie. We patched those systems. There is absolutely no structural compromise. Our compliance certificates are perfectly valid and legally binding. He was hyperventilating now, drawing in ragged, shallow breaths. The confident billionaire had been completely stripped away, revealing a terrified, desperate child. Please, you cannot pull the $80 million. We have a signed agreement. I am begging you. Just let me bring my lead engineers into your office tomorrow morning to clear this up. The person on the other end obviously terminated the call without entertaining his pleas. Carter stood completely frozen in the center of the room, staring at the blank screen of his phone as if the device had just pronounced his official death sentence. A raw, guttural sound of pure agony clawed its way out of his throat. He raised his right arm high into the air and hurled his expensive smartphone directly downward with all his remaining strength. The device smashed into a dozen jagged, ruined pieces against the heavy base of the dining table. He whipped his head toward me, his face contorted into a mask of terrifying, unhinged fury. You! He screamed, his voice cracking, spraying saliva across the expensive floral centerpiece. You ruined my life. You destroyed my entire career. That was my empire, and you burned it to the ground because you are a jealous, insignificant little nobody. I am going to lose absolutely everything because of your pathetic meddling. The sheer, concentrated chaos of his meltdown washed over me like a light, meaningless breeze. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I calmly pushed my chair back and stood up from the table. I looked across the room at Liam, giving him a single, definitive nod. My husband immediately stood and walked over to the twins, quietly helping them gather their wooden puzzles and coloring books from the floor. I walked over to the armchair in the corner and picked up their heavy winter coats. I knelt down beside my daughter, gently helping her thread her arms through the padded sleeves, completely ignoring the madman's screaming obscenities just a few feet away. I zipped up her jacket, adjusted her wool scarf, and then slowly turned back to face my brother. I did not destroy your life. Carter, I said softly. My voice carried a profound, unshakable clarity that cut straight through his psychotic rage, silencing his screaming instantly. Your own unchecked greed destroyed your life. I simply stopped you from committing massive financial fraud and stealing millions of dollars from a federally insured institution. You built your fragile little empire on stolen money and forged documents, and you actually believed you could sell a ticking time bomb to a bank without any consequences. You are not a victim here today. You are a criminal. The brutal, unvarnished truth of my words hit the room with the devastating physical force of a freight train. My father, who had been standing with his fists clenched, ready to defend his golden boy just moments ago, suddenly looked like a deflated balloon. The aggressive, angry color vanished completely from his face, replaced by a hollow, terrified gray hue. His knees visibly buckled beneath him, and he collapsed heavily back into his dining chair. His eyes grew wide with horrified, paralyzing comprehension. He looked at the shattered pieces of the phone on the floor, and then slowly looked up at Carter's manic, sweating, guilty face. The realization hit him physically. The son he worshipped was not a genius entrepreneur. He was a desperate con artist. Beside him, my mother let out a small, broken whimper. She brought her trembling hands up to cover her mouth, tears of absolute devastation spilling over her eyelashes. The glittering, invincible illusion of their perfect, wealthy son shattered completely into dust right before their eyes, leaving behind nothing but the pathetic, ugly reality of a fraudster staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. We did not stay for dessert, nor did we wait for the situation to somehow miraculously de-escalate. Liam and I immediately ushered our two young children out into the freezing, snowy night, leaving behind a massive, decorated house that suddenly felt more like a collapsing tomb than a family home. As Liam started the engine of our sensible car, the muffled, desperate sounds of Carter screaming profanities at his broken phone echoed through the heavy front door, blending horribly with the chaotic, broken wails of our parents. I did not turn my head to look back at the brightly lit windows, not even once. As we drove away from the upscale suburban neighborhood, the thick, heavy silence inside our vehicle was not tense or uncomfortable. Instead, it was the sound of absolute, pure liberation. The suffocating weight I had carried on my shoulders for 35 years had completely vanished into the winter air. Exactly 3 weeks passed. The heavy winter storms finally broke, giving way to clear skies. But the devastating storm surrounding my brother was only just making landfall. National financial news networks began broadcasting the spectacular, highly public collapse of his entire empire. Footage played on a continuous, relentless loop across every channel, showing dozens of federal agents in dark jackets carrying heavy cardboard boxes filled with hard drives and physical documents out of the sleek, glass-fronted downtown headquarters of his company. The authorities had executed a massive, coordinated dawn raid, immediately freezing every single corporate account and personal asset connected to his name. The news anchors confirmed exactly what I already knew. It was a multi-million-dollar federal fraud scheme built entirely on the stolen savings of thousands of everyday, hard-working users. His designer suits and luxury cars were suddenly worthless against the crushing weight of multiple federal indictments. The final, pathetic act of his grand, delusional play occurred on a freezing Tuesday morning at exactly 2 o'clock. A frantic, violent pounding on our heavy oak front door jolted Liam and me out of a deep sleep. I threw on my thick wool robe, walked slowly down the stairs, and peered through the glass peephole. Standing on my porch was a ghostly, disheveled figure shivering violently in the biting cold. It was Carter. He looked completely unrecognizable. The arrogant titan of industry was gone. His expensive clothes were heavily wrinkled and stained, his hair was wildly matted, and his eyes were wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. He had clearly not slept in days. His wealthy, influential friends had undoubtedly abandoned him the second the federal warrants were unsealed. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a few inches, keeping the heavy chain engaged. Before I could even speak a single word, he desperately shoved a crumpled, handwritten document toward my face. "Stella, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate sob. "You have to sign this paper for me. It is a sworn affidavit stating that your team at Aegis made a systemic technical error during the final audit. It is the absolute only way my defense lawyers can establish reasonable doubt in court. You have to save me. Stella, please, we are family. You cannot let them send me to a federal prison." I did not reach out to take the piece of paper. Instead, I calmly picked up a thick, neatly bound manila folder from the entryway console table. I unhooked the chain, stepped out onto the freezing porch, and dropped the heavy folder directly onto the concrete floor, right next to his expensive leather shoes. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. "You are exactly 48 hours too late, Carter," I said, my voice completely empty of pity, anger, or malice. "That is a printed copy of the final, unredacted corporate audit report." I handed the original, heavily encrypted master files directly to the lead agents of the Federal Cybercrimes Division 2 days ago. They possess absolutely everything now. Every hidden transaction, every forged compliance signature, and every single internal email where you specifically ordered your development team to illegally cover up the massive security breach. There is absolutely no technical loophole left for you to crawl through, and there is no one left to manipulate. He stared at the folder on the ground for a long moment before his knees visibly gave out. He collapsed onto the frozen concrete, burying his face in his trembling hands as a long, agonizing wail of total defeat tore from his throat. I did not offer a word of comfort. I simply stepped back inside, firmly shut the heavy door, and locked the deadbolt with a loud, satisfying click, leaving him alone in the dark. Early the very next morning, my cell phone lit up with an incoming call from my mother. The exact moment I answered, she launched into a hysterical, sobbing tirade, aggressively calling me a cold-blooded monster for intentionally destroying my own flesh and blood. She demanded to know how I could sleep at night knowing my brother was facing years behind bars. I listened to her toxic weeping for exactly 10 seconds. I realized then that she would never see the truth. She would only ever see the destruction of her golden illusion. I simply pressed the red button, terminating the call. I immediately went into my phone settings and permanently blocked both of my parents' contact numbers, followed by all of their social media accounts. The toxic, suffocating cycle of emotional abuse and blatant favoritism was officially and irrevocably broken forever. I walked back into our sunlit kitchen. Liam was standing by the stove, the warm, comforting scent of fresh jasmine tea filling the air. He handed me a steaming ceramic mug and wrapped his strong, reassuring arm around my shoulders, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss to my temple. I took a slow, deep sip of the hot tea and smiled, watching the golden morning light spill across our quiet, peaceful home. I finally understood a profound, life-altering truth. A real family does not demand that you swallow your pride, shrink yourself down, and endure endless humiliation just to stroke their fragile egos. A true family is the quiet, safe sanctuary where your integrity is deeply cherished, your boundaries are respected, and your peace is fiercely protected. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.